The call came in at 6:52 in the morning, while the light was still gray and thin over the hills. A groundskeeper at the Rahimi Girls' School had gone out early to sweep the front steps before the students arrived, the way he did every day, and had noticed the wiring before he noticed anything else. A thin copper thread running along the underside of the third step, disappearing into a gap where the concrete had cracked years ago and never been fixed. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He'd lived through enough years in this district to know what wire under a step usually meant. By the time Technical Sergeant Melissa Grant arrived with her team, the school had been cleared and a perimeter set 200 meters back, and the street in front of the building was empty, except for a stray dog sniffing along the gutter and a single teacher standing at the edge of the cordon with her arms crossed, watching. Melissa didn't look at the teacher. She looked at the steps. "Talk to me," she said to Staff Sergeant Owens, who was crouched by the robot, trying to get the camera arm to bend at an angle that would let them see under the lip of the third step without moving anything. "Camera's not going to get there," Owens said. "Angle's wrong. We'd need to reposition the whole platform, and that means driving it up the steps, and I don't love that idea." "Neither do I." She crouched next to him and looked through the small monitor at the grainy image the camera had managed. A dark gap, a suggestion of wire. Nothing more. 9 years doing this job had taught her that the moment a picture stopped being useful was the moment you had two choices. Wait for better equipment that might not come in time, or go in yourself and let your own eyes do what the camera couldn't. She thought about the students. 14 of them today, according to the groundskeeper, arriving in 20 minutes if nobody told them otherwise. "I'm going in by hand," she said. Owens didn't argue. That wasn't his style. Not with her. He'd worked with technicians who needed to be talked down or talked up, and Melissa was neither. She just needed the space to do it right. The suit was heavy in a way people who'd never worn one couldn't understand. Not just physically, though it was that too, but in the way it changed how the world felt. Everything got quieter inside it. Everything got slower. She liked that. Slow was safe. She knelt at the base of the steps and used a small mirror on an extendable rod to look into the gap before she reached in with her hands, the way she'd done maybe 400 times in her career, the way that had kept her alive through all 400 of them. The device was simple, uglier than most, actually, put together in a hurry or by someone without much formal training, wired to a pressure trigger set to respond to weight on the step itself. Not sophisticated. Sophisticated devices didn't scare her as much as careless ones. Careless ones could go wrong in ways nobody predicted. She worked the way she always worked, narrating quietly into her radio so Owens could follow along, cutting nothing until she understood what every wire was doing. Red to the trigger, black to the battery pack, older than the rest of the build, salvaged from something else. A third wire, thin, taped along the casing, that didn't seem to connect to anything at all. That was when she saw the paper. It was folded twice and pressed flat against the inside of the casing, held there with a strip of the same tape used on the wiring, like whoever built this had run out of better places to put it or had wanted it exactly there, tucked against the mechanism instead of somewhere it might get lost. She almost left it. Paper wasn't her job. Paper wasn't the threat. But something about the way it was placed, deliberate, careful, in a device built without much care for anything else, made her stop for 3 full seconds before she kept working. She disarmed the trigger first. That part took 11 minutes, methodical and unremarkable, the same way it always was when it went well. When the device was safe, inert, photographed and bagged for the intelligence team, she finally reached back in and peeled the folded paper free. Owens crouched next to her as she opened it, the two of them still close to the steps. Still in the quiet, the morning hadn't fully broken yet. It was a child's drawing. Crayon, by the look of the color that had survived. A house with a peaked roof, a yellow sun in the corner with lines coming off it like spokes, and 3 stick figures standing in front of the house holding hands. A big one, a smaller one, and one in between. Underneath, in careful, uneven letters that looked like they belonged to a child, just learning to write in 2 languages at once, a few words Melissa didn't recognize. She sat back on her heels, still holding it, the suit's gloves making the paper feel strange and far away in her hands. "Why?" she said, mostly to herself. "Would someone put this in here?" Owens looked at the drawing, then at her, and didn't have an answer. Nobody did yet. The forward operating base sat on the edge of the district like something dropped there by accident. All concrete barriers and canvas and the smell of diesel that never fully went away. By the time Melissa got back that afternoon, the device had already been logged, photographed from every angle, tagged and passed up the chain to the intelligence shop the way every device was. Standard procedure. The drawing went with it, sealed in a small evidence bag, item 4 of 6. She should have been done with it there. That was how the job worked. You didn't get to keep pieces of the things you found. You handed them off and moved to the next call, because there was always a next call. She kept thinking about the drawing anyway. It wasn't the first strange thing she'd found inside a device. In 9 years, she'd pulled out photographs, a child's shoe once, a wedding ring soldered accidentally into a battery pack from some other use entirely. Objects ended up in these things because the people who built them scavenged whatever they could find, and sentiment didn't stop people from being desperate enough to use what was in front of them. But those things had always felt like accidents. This hadn't. The tape, the placement, the care. "You're doing the thing again," Owen said, dropping into the seat across from her in the mess tent, tray in hand. Not really a question. "What thing?" "The thing where you get quiet for a whole afternoon and I know it's not about the wiring." She didn't answer right away. Owens had worked with her long enough to know when to wait her out instead of pushing, and she was grateful for it more often than she let on. "It doesn't make sense to me," she finally said. "You build something to kill kids walking into a school, and somewhere in the middle of building it, you stop and you tape a child's drawing inside it. Like you're protecting it, like it matters to you. Or somebody else planted it there. Wrong place, wrong device. Coincidence." Maybe. She didn't believe it, and from the look on his face, neither did he. Not really. She didn't talk about it easily, but Owens was one of the only people out here who knew the shape of what she carried underneath the job. The marriage that had ended 2 years ago, quietly, without either of them able to explain exactly when it had started dying. The pregnancy she'd lost the year before that, early enough that almost nobody had known to ask about it later, which had somehow made it lonelier instead of easier. She didn't think about it most days. The job didn't leave much room for it. But a child's drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house, had gotten past whatever kept the rest of it at a distance, and she couldn't explain that to Owens in a way that didn't sound like exactly the kind of thing that got technicians reassigned to desks. "If you go asking around about this," Owens said, like he'd heard the thought anyway, "you're not doing EOD work anymore. You're doing something else, and nobody up the chain is going to thank you for it if it goes sideways." "I know. I mean it, Grant. You start chasing a story instead of clearing a threat. That's how people get hurt, or reassigned, probably both, in whichever order the Air Force feels like doing it to you." "I know," she said again, and didn't stop thinking about it. She found Rashid 2 days later. Not by design exactly, though she wouldn't have called it an accident either. He was the team's usual interpreter for community liaison work, a quiet man in his 40s who'd been doing this job long enough to have opinions about it he rarely shared. She caught him after a supply run, showed him a photograph of the drawing on her phone before she'd fully decided she was going to. He looked at it for a long moment, longer than she expected. "The writing," he said. "It's a child's hand. Learning both languages at once looks like some of the letters are backward, the way children do." He tapped the corner of the screen, near the sun with its spoked lines. "This style, the way the sun is drawn, the lines like this. I have seen this before. There used to be a woman who taught art at that school before the district changed hands. She had her students draw suns this way. Same thing every time. It was her way of teaching them, I think. Start with the sun, then the rest follows. You know her. I knew of her. Nadia. She had a daughter in the school too, maybe 7, 8 years old now. He was quiet for a moment, weighing something. Nobody has seen her teaching in weeks. Some people say she stopped coming because it wasn't safe anymore for a woman to be seen working with the school after the coalition helped reopen it. Others say worse things. Worse things like what? Rashid didn't answer that directly, and something in the way he didn't told her more than an answer would have. Her husband, he said instead. He is not someone people speak about carefully. Some say he left to join people on the other side of this. Some say he never had a choice in it. He handed her phone back. If this drawing belongs to her daughter, Sergeant, I would think very carefully about why it ended up where you found it. She already had been. She just hadn't had a name to put to the thinking yet, and now she did. Nadia, and a daughter, and a husband nobody wanted to talk about directly. Somewhere on the other side of a line that ran straight through the middle of a family instead of around it. Getting authorization for the visit took longer than Melissa expected and less convincing than she'd feared. She framed it the only way that had a chance of being approved. A community liaison follow-up related to the school incident. Standard outreach. Nothing about a personal investigation. Nothing about a drawing that had kept her awake 2 nights running. Her captain signed off on a short visit with Rashid as interpreter. 1 vehicle, back before dark. He didn't ask her why she wanted to go herself instead of handing it to the liaison team that usually did this work. She was glad he didn't, because she wasn't sure her answer would have held up. Nadia's house sat at the edge of the district, past where the paved road gave up and became packed dirt, close enough to the tree line that Melissa's instincts prickled the whole drive in. It was a small house, well kept in the way that told her someone was trying hard to make it look like nothing was wrong. A goat was tied near the door. Laundry hung on a line strung between 2 posts, moving slightly in a wind that didn't reach the ground. Nadia answered the door herself, and Melissa understood immediately why Rashid had chosen his words so carefully back at the base. She was younger than Melissa had pictured, maybe 30, with the kind of exhausted alertness in her eyes that Melissa recognized from her own mirror on the worst weeks of deployment. The look of someone who had stopped sleeping deeply a long time ago and had simply learned to function without it. Rashid spoke first, gently, explaining who they were and why they'd come. Melissa watched Nadia's face while he talked, watched the fear move through it and then get folded away, carefully, the way you'd fold something you didn't want anyone else to see. You found something, Nadia said, once Rashid had finished, before he'd even translated the next part. Her English was better than Melissa expected. At the school steps, that is why you are here. Yes. Melissa took out her phone, hesitated a moment, then showed her the photograph. Nadia's hand went to her mouth. Not dramatically, quietly, the way a person reacts when something private has suddenly become very public. A girl appeared in the doorway behind her, 7 or 8 years old, dark eyes taking in the 2 strangers, and then the phone in Melissa's hand. And Melissa understood without being told that this was Amina, and that the drawing was hers. "May we come in?" Melissa asked, and Nadia nodded slowly and stepped back from the door. Inside, over tea that Melissa suspected Nadia could not easily spare, the story came out in pieces, translated by Rashid in a low voice, Nadia occasionally correcting his English herself when a word wasn't quite right. Her husband, Farid, had once been a teacher too, mathematics, at a different school across the district, before the fighting had reshaped which roads were safe and which were not. When the lines had hardened, he'd been pulled toward one side of them, not entirely by choice. Nadia insisted, her voice steady on this point in a way it hadn't been on anything else. Men who refused outright did not simply get to walk away in this district. They disappeared, or their families did. "He did not want this," she said. "I need you to understand that. Whatever he has become part of, it is not because he wanted it." Melissa didn't argue with her. She'd learned enough in 9 years of this work not to trust easy categories. Good side, bad side, willing, unwilling. The line usually ran crooked, straight through people instead of around them. Amina had drawn the picture 3 weeks earlier, Nadia explained, after a night when her father had come to the edge of their property in the dark. Not close enough to come inside, close enough only to be seen for a moment from the window. He hadn't spoken to them. He'd left again before Nadia could reach the door. Amina had cried for an hour, and then, the next morning, drawn the picture. The house, the sun, the way her art teacher had taught her, the three of them holding hands, and asked her mother to find a way to get it to him. "I did not know how," Nadia said. "There is no safe way to send anything to him now. I did not know what I did instead was worse than doing nothing." She'd given the drawing to a cousin, she said, someone who claimed he could get word to Farid through people who moved between both sides of the district. Men who ran errands, carried messages, sometimes carried other things. She hadn't asked what else the cousin carried. She hadn't wanted to know. "I only wanted him to see it," she said, and for the first time her composure broke slightly, just at the edges. "I wanted him to remember what he has, before he does something that cannot be undone. I did not send my daughter's drawing to be put inside a bomb, Sergeant. I sent it so her father would remember his family." Melissa sat with that for a long moment, the tea going cold in her hands. It didn't excuse anything. It didn't make the device under the school steps less dangerous, or the 14 children who would have walked over it less at risk. But it reframed the shape of the thing entirely. This wasn't a story about a man building something evil and pausing, oddly, to feel something human in the middle of it. This was a message that had gone in through the wrong door and come out wired to a trigger, carried by people who didn't care what they were carrying as long as it moved between the two sides unnoticed. A family being pulled apart by a line neither of them had drawn, and a drawing meant to reach across it that had ended up instead as camouflage for something meant to kill. "Is there a way to find him?" Melissa asked. "Not to arrest him, just to know what he knows. Whether there's more of these." Nadia looked at her for a long moment, and something moved behind her eyes that Melissa couldn't fully read. Hope, maybe, or the specific kind of fear that came from hope you didn't trust yet. "I do not know where he is," she said. "But if there are more of these devices, Sergeant, I do not think he built the last one to reach the school. I think, if it is truly his work, that step was closest to where he could leave it, and still know we would be near enough to hear." Melissa didn't understand what she meant by that. Not yet. She would, 3 days later, when the second device turned up outside the market. The report came in on a Thursday morning, relayed through the district police liaison in the clipped, careful language everyone used for these things. "Suspicious package, market district. Similar construction to the item recovered at the school." Melissa was in the middle of routine equipment checks when she heard it, and she was already moving toward the truck before the full brief had finished coming through the radio. Owens caught her in the yard before she could reach the gear locker. "This one's not ours," he said. "Rotation's got Delgado's team on call today. Let them take it." "I want it." "Grant." He said her name the way he did when he was about to spend real effort talking her out of something. "You've spent the last 5 days chasing down a family that has nothing to do with clearing threats. I let it slide because it didn't cost anything and because, frankly, I understand why you couldn't let it go. But this is a live device in a crowded market, and you want to take it because you think you understand the guy who built it. That's not how this works." "That's exactly how this works," she said. "You know it is. Pattern recognition is half the job, Owens. If this is the same builder, I already know things about his construction habits that Delgado's team doesn't. I know he's careless in specific ways. I know he leaves personal items inside his devices instead of stripping them out for security like a trained bomber would. That's not sentiment, that's information, and it might be the difference between someone doing this clean and someone missing something because they don't know to look for it." Owen studied her for a long moment, weighing something she couldn't quite read on his face. Professional judgment fighting with the plain fact that she wasn't wrong. "If I sign off on this," he said slowly, "you work it exactly like every other device. No shortcuts because you think you understand the guy. You still treat every wire like it wants to kill you. Are we clear?" "We're clear." The market was already cleared by the time they arrived. Stalls abandoned mid-morning with produce still laid out. A strange stillness sitting over a place that should have been loud. The device had been found wedged beneath a low wall near the entrance to the covered section, spotted by a vendor who'd noticed wiring where wiring had no business being. Melissa went in slowly, the way she always did, narrating for Owens over the radio as she worked through the casing. The construction matched the school device almost exactly. The same hurried soldering, the same salvaged battery pack, the same careless confidence of someone who knew enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be careful. She found the trigger mechanism and began the work of understanding it, wire by wire, the way 9 years of training had taught her never to skip. And then, taped again against the inner casing, she found paper. This one was different. Not a child's crayon drawing this time. A scrap torn from a notebook, covered in handwriting, adult handwriting, hurried and uneven like it had been written quickly, maybe in poor light. It was unfinished. The sentence broke off partway down the page. She couldn't read the language, but Rashid, standing well back at the edge of the perimeter, could see enough through her helmet camera feed relayed to his tablet to make out a few words she read aloud to him over the radio. "It says her name." Rashid's voice came back, tight. "Amina. It's addressed to her. Sergeant, I think this might not have been finished before it went into the device." Melissa went still, one hand near the final wire. The mechanism half understood in front of her. "Owens," she said quietly, "I need you to hear something before I move on this last connection." She explained it fast. The note, the name, the possibility that this device had not been built purely as a weapon, but as something closer to what Nadia had described 3 days earlier. A message meant to travel near enough for a family to hear about it, even if it never reached them directly. If that was true, the construction might be intentionally survivable, in a way a device meant purely to kill would not be. Or she could be wrong, and reading intention into wiring that didn't care about intention at all, and get herself killed believing a story instead of trusting the mechanism in front of her. "What's your read?" Owens said. Not a challenge, a real question. She looked at the final wire, the placement of the trigger relative to where a note like this would need to sit to survive detonation instead of burn with it. If Farid had built this the way Nadia believed he might, torn between two loyalties, incapable of fully committing to either, there was a chance the device was built to be found before anyone triggered it, not to be triggered at all. Placed somewhere, it would draw attention. Reported quickly, the way this one had been, by a vendor who'd simply noticed wire where it shouldn't be. But a chance wasn't a certainty, and certainty was the only thing her training trusted. "My read is I still treat this like it wants to kill someone," she said finally. "Because it still might. But I don't think the builder wanted it to reach detonation. I think he wanted it found." She finished the disarm exactly the way she'd finish any other, methodical, patient, trusting the mechanism and not the story she'd built around it. 11 minutes, same as the school steps, her hands steady even with everything she now believed sitting heavy behind her ribs. When it was done, she sat back, pulled the note free, and read the unfinished sentence again in the fading light of the covered market. Rashid's translation coming quiet over the radio. "Tell her I still remember the sun the way she draws it." It stopped there. Whatever came next, Farid hadn't written it, or hadn't been able to. The debrief came 2 days later, and it went about as well as Owens had warned her it might. Melissa sat across from her captain in a plywood office that smelled like hot dust and burnt coffee, and answered questions about liaison visits that hadn't been fully authorized, about time spent on a family with no direct threat connection, about a second device she'd insisted on taking that wasn't technically her rotation. "You didn't do it by the book," her captain said, not unkindly. "You know that. I know that. You also cleared 2 devices clean and got ahead of what might have been an escalating situation before command even had a name for it." He set down the file. "I'm not writing you up, Sergeant. I'm telling you that next time, you loop me in before you go knocking on doors. That's the only version of this where I can actually back you when it works out." "Understood, sir." It was as close to being right and being wrong at the same time as she'd ever felt. Owens found her afterward, leaning against the truck in the yard, arms crossed the way he did when he had something to say and wasn't sure yet how to say it. "For what it's worth," he said, "your read on that second device was right. I've seen guys 20 years into this job miss what you saw in that construction. Doesn't mean I want you doing it that way again." "Noted. I mean it, Grant. You got lucky that your instinct and the mechanism agreed with each other. One day they won't, and I need to know you'll trust the wire over the story." "I did trust the wire," she said. "I just let the story tell me where to look first." She looked at him. "That's not nothing, Owens. That's most of the job, if we're honest about it." He didn't argue that one. He just shook his head, the particular way that meant he'd lost this round and knew it. Getting Nadia and Amina somewhere safer took longer than either the disarming or the debrief, and cost more in favors than Melissa liked to think about. A conversation with the community liaison officer she'd avoided going through channels with the first time. A case file built carefully around genuine protection concerns, instead of anything that would draw attention to a husband on the wrong side of a line. It wasn't the kind of ending where paperwork solved everything. Fareed was never found, never captured, never redeemed in any way Melissa could point to and call finished. He existed, as far as anyone could confirm, somewhere between two sides of a conflict that hadn't asked him what he wanted, and that was where he stayed, an unresolved sentence the way his note had been. But Nadia and Amina left the district 3 weeks later, relocated through a program meant for exactly this kind of danger, and before they went, Nadia found Melissa at the edge of the base perimeter, during one of the few moments Melissa could arrange to see her without drawing questions she couldn't yet answer. "I don't know what to say to you," Nadia said. "You did not have to look for us." "No," Melissa agreed. "I didn't." "Why did you?" Melissa thought about it longer than the question probably needed. "Because somebody built something ugly," she finally said, "and put something honest inside it by accident. And I couldn't walk away from the honest part just because it came wrapped in the ugly one." Nadia didn't have a response to that, not in words. She reached out instead and pressed something small into Melissa's hand before she turned to go. A folded piece of paper, and when Melissa opened it later, alone, she found a second drawing. The same house. The same sun with its spoked lines. 4 stick figures now instead of 3. Standing in a row, holding hands, with a small note beneath it in Amina's careful, uneven English, clearly written with her mother's help. "Thank you for finding my picture." Melissa went home 8 months later, when her rotation ended, to a small apartment outside Dayton that still had unpacked boxes from the divorce sitting in the hallway closet, untouched because unpacking them meant deciding they were staying there for good. She kept the photograph of Amina's second drawing in her wallet, behind her ID, where she looked at it more often than she would have admitted to anyone, including Owens. She didn't know what had become of Fareed. She probably never would. Some stories didn't close the way people wanted them to. They just stopped being urgent and became something a person carried instead, folded small enough to fit somewhere quiet. On a Saturday morning in early spring, sitting alone at her kitchen table with coffee going cold the way Nadia's tea once had, Melissa found herself thinking, not for the first time, but for the first time without flinching from it, about the family she'd once wanted and lost before it ever fully began. She didn't reach for a drawing of her own to hold on to, but she let herself sit with the thought a while longer than she usually allowed, and that, for her, was its own kind of turning point. Some devices you disarm with your hands, others take a great deal longer, and you're never entirely sure when the last wire's been cut. Thank you all for watching Technical Sergeant Melissa Grant's story to the end. If this one stayed with you, if you found yourself thinking about Nadia, about Amina's drawing, about the wires that don't get cut with your hands, that's exactly the kind of story we hope to keep bringing you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There are more stories like this one coming, more women who served with courage nobody wrote headlines about. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.